and feeling as Arab Americans. Kuwaitis, Iraqis, Palestinians all call America home, but their homelands are in their thoughts now. NBC's Keith Morrison.
In a place called Rancho Cucamonga, California, a Kuwaiti student has been making cable TV programs about Iraqi atrocities in his country. Today, it was he answering questions, though he hardly knew what to think.
We have all kind of emotions right now. Everything is mixed up. We don't know whether to celebrate, whether to cry, whether to go to Kuwait right now, whether to wait a little longer.
Around America are Kuwaitis in waiting, desperate to know, to be there. The Cabazards who got out after the occupation.
I wish I was there to see it, because I was there for 6 weeks, and I know every day we prayed to see those American soldiers on the streets, and I really wish I was there to celebrate with them.
They feel relief. They feel grateful. They feel this.
I mean, it's like a nightmare that's over.
But in America also are Arabs whose nightmare is not over. Caught like this man who asked that his name not be used for fear of inviting recrimination in his adopted America, and trouble for his family in Iraq. He watched the pictures of Iraqi POWs and wept. He has brothers in that army.
Well, I was a couple of feet away from the TV screen, on my knees. My wife was next to me crying just to see those faces, and the way they look, the anxiety on their faces, hunger and being tired. The emotions is really, I cannot express it.
Arab Americans have prayed for the war to end, for bloodshed to stop. They mourned for Kuwait, for Iraq, for the innocents who have died. Many Arab Americans worry now, how will Palestinians be treated in the new Kuwait?
I am very worried about that they will ask them to just leave and to expel them from the country. And then we have a problem in our hands. Where are they going to go?
More questions. In the Middle East, always more questions. Keith Morrison, NBC News, Los Angeles.
And now back to Tom Brokaw in Kuwait City. Tom.
Thank you, Jane. I suspect that no one is watching these developments with more interest than those Americans who were trapped in Kuwait when the war broke out. One of them is with us now from New York, Karen Glass. She was speaking to NBC News the night the war broke out when the telephone service was suddenly interrupted from here at the Hilton Hotel. And I can tell you, Karen Glass, that the telephone service tonight is no better. All of the services and power are out. But what are your impressions now as you are safe back in America and you look at Kuwait City, for which you had such an effect?
I feel, as I think many people who have been there or anybody who is a Kuwaiti, the sadness that why did this happen? How did it happen? Why did it come to this? And it's a human tragedy, and all of the untold human tragedies that will never be known.
Would you describe yourself as being obsessed by this war and what's happening in Kuwait?
I don't think obsessed, but certainly since the ground war started, I have been, it's been hard for me to keep back tears. I think that anybody who has spent any time there, as a human being, you tend to get on with your life, but my heart and a great part of me has been with the soldiers and with the Kuwaiti people during this ordeal.
Karen, I think it's brief. It would be instructive to kind of briefly recap what you went through. Now that I'm in the city, I have a better sense of the density of it and how many high-rise buildings there are and so on. Were you able to hide for a while here?
Yes, if you're standing looking to the Gulf, Tom, 3 apartment complexes to your right is where I stayed. And I think one of the saving factors to me was every day I woke up and I looked out at the Gulf. So my view was a calming blue Gulf.
And you had a lot of help from your Kuwaiti friends.
Well, I'm a very lucky human being. I was taken care of from the first day by a wonderful Kuwaiti gentleman who I hope to speak to someday soon now in Kuwait, and all of his friends. Literally hundreds of Kuwaitis all the way along helped me, and my heart is certainly with all of those people who stayed and all of those people who left and are eager to get back.
Thank you very much, Karen Glass, for being with us once again tonight. When we return in a moment, this question: should Saddam Hussein be put on trial for war crimes?
Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, Idi Amin. None of them ever stood trial. will Saddam Hussein. Many are calling him a war criminal, and as NBC's Lisa Myers reports, a powerful case is already being built against him.
They are the worst. There's no civilization at all. They kill not by guns only, by torturing. We saw 7 people and 3 women naked without any shooting, by torturing.
Rape, mutilation, murder, execution of children. The tales of Iraqi terror horrify even those not easily shocked.
The absolutely unspeakable atrocities that occurred in Kuwait in the last week. They're not a part of the same human race. The people that did that the rest of us are. I've got to pray that that's the case.
Allied forces will screen Iraqi prisoners of war to try to identify those responsible. But the Kuwaitis overwhelmingly blame one man, Saddam Hussein.
No one should have any doubt that this man should be, if captured, and his party be tried as war criminals.
A senior administration official says the United States also believes Saddam merits prosecution as a war criminal. A team of up to a dozen U.S. military prosecutors soon will enter Kuwait City. Their mission?
To identify those people who have actual knowledge of what went on. Take their statements, safeguard those statements, and then build a case just as any prosecutor would do in the United States.
Experts say the legal case against Saddam is strong.
Charge 1, violation of the laws of war in mistreatment of prisoners of war and in mistreatment of civilians in Kuwait. Charge 2, crimes against the peace for waging an aggressive war, Ella Nuremberg. Charge 3, crimes against humanity for firing Scud missiles at civilian population centers in Tel Aviv and Riyadh.
But prosecuting Saddam is less a legal decision than a political one. The United States is not willing to go to Baghdad to hunt him down. So unless Saddam falls into Allied hands, any trial would have to be in absentia. Senior administration officials say the United States will not publicly push for prosecution of Saddam. But if the Kuwaitis want to try Saddam in absentia, the United States will help build the case. And according to one official, George Bush will be cheering all the way. Lisa Myers, NBC News, Washington.
Overshadowed by this Gulf War has been the Senate's investigation of 5 of its own, the so-called Keating Five. It went...
Why they were out there 7 months. They were very proud of the job they had done. It was a very dangerous mission. And because of a system that didn't work, America never knew, because the tapes never got back. And as each day went by and the tapes hadn't gone, these Marines, became more and more upset.
And the battlefield was a lot tougher than you expected it to be?
Yes, it was a long walk, tedious walk, and very dangerous through mine belts. Luckily, we didn't encounter much Iraqi resistance, but it was a very treacherous journey through those mine belts.
Mike Boettcher, it's good to have you back.
Thank you.
We want to conclude tonight with NBC's Jamie Gangel, with a little wrap-up on the wit and the wisdom today of General Norman Schwarzkopf.
Around the Pentagon, it's being called the mother of all briefings.
What are your impressions of Saddam Hussein as a military strategist?
He is neither a strategist, nor is he schooled in the operational art, nor is he a tactician, nor is he a general, nor is he as a soldier. Other than that, he's a great military man. I want you to know that.
Sarcasm, drama, wit, and bravado, he is a commanding presence center stage.
If it had been our intention to destroy the country, if it had been our intention to overrun the country, we could have done it unopposed.
Intimidating, rumored to have an IQ of 170, he doesn't suffer fools gladly.
You ever been in a minefield?
No.
Because all there's got to be is one mine, and that's intense.
But he is a muddy-boot soldier devoted to the safety of his troops.
The loss of one human life is intolerable to any of us who are in the military. But I would tell you that casualties of that order of magnitude, considering the job that's been done and the number of forces that are involved, is almost miraculous as far as the light number of casualties. It'll never be miraculous to the families of those people, but it is miraculous.
But after weeks of caution and modesty, today was clearly Schwarzkopf's day.
How effective was the air-ground campaign? I think it's pretty effective myself. I don't know what you all think. Right.
Originally, the Pentagon was going to have its own briefing after Schwarzkopf. It was canceled. He's a hard act to follow. His boss, Defense Secretary Dick Cheney, says it's that style that has made the war and the warrior such a success.
It's what we've referred to as the don't screw around school of military strategy.
Jamie Gangel, NBC News, the Pentagon.
We'll be back with some final thoughts with Jane Pauley right after this. Explored over the last 7 months about what could go wrong here politically and militarily. Almost all of them have been proved wrong. In fact, everything has gone extremely right, beginning with the politics of the alliance and then with what is a total military victory that we're on the verge of here in the Persian Gulf.
Yeah, I'd say if it's not too late, I'd unload any stock you had in conventional wisdom, that's for sure. Tom, can I ask a question? General Schwarzkopf's not going to just fade away. What's his future hold?
Well, I think that General Powell, Colin Powell, and General Norman Schwarzkopf, who were both officers in Vietnam, have now put the military back in the front rank of the American establishment, and they have to be considered prime political candidates for the future as well. We'll see. Anyhow, tonight, President Bush at 9 Eastern Time. That's Nightly News for now. I'm Tom Brokaw in Kuwait City for Jane Pauley in Washington.
News Center 4 at 5.
And now, again, freedom. Unbelievable. Really, really unbelievable.
People in Kuwait City take to the streets, celebrating the end of Iraqi occupation and giving U.S. troops a hero's welcome. And NBC News is quoting senior Pentagon sources as saying tonight the war may be coming to a rapid close. President Bush will be addressing the nation in 1 hour.
Meantime, the Pentagon says what may have been the first and last big battle of the war is over, with coalition forces scoring a crushing victory. As these French and British forces continued their advance into Iraq, the main fighting was taking place near the city of Basra. There, U.S. and coalition armored divisions battled Iraq's Republican Guard in what's being called the biggest tank battle since the Second World War. The U.S. threw some 470 M1A1 tanks and hundreds of armored vehicles against an estimated 300 Iraqi tanks, many of them top-of-the-line Soviet-made T-72s. The U.S. tanks have come out on top. U.S. and French tank divisions attacked from the west, pinning the Iraqis down. More U.S. and British troops joined the attack, cutting off Iraqi escape routes. Pentagon commanders say they've defeated 4 of 6 Republican Guard divisions in the past few days, and the remaining troops are in full flight. And Pentagon commanders say there are now only 18 viable battalions of Iraqi troops left, only 1 division. That at most is fewer than 30,000 troops.
We're speaking to you live now from a building, the rooftop deck of a part of a building across the street from the American Embassy here in Kuwait City, speaking to you on a generator-powered satellite portable uplink pack. This of their city from the Iraqis who have fled and surrendered. Here's how it looked.
There was no particular parade of troops into Kuwait, just happy chaos everywhere.
Welcome, Mr. Bush, welcome.
Kuwaiti women cheered and wagged their tongues at passing motorists. There were U.S. Marines and other troops in the streets of Kuwait City here, but some U.S. soldiers were tied down at the airport where there was a remaining pocket of Iraqi resistance. Then during the day, those Iraqi resistors gave up, and some Iraqi prisoners could be seen being paraded through the streets of Kuwait City. So many Iraqis are still surrendering today that I saw one postman who was actually stopped by 4 Iraqis. He pulled his gun, put them in the back of his mail truck, and drove them to custody. The Kuwaiti flag could be seen waving everywhere, from bridges, from automobiles. People in the streets waved Kuwaiti flags. As is often the case in the Middle East, the celebration took the form of gunfire. It was loud and sometimes frightening, but these people were happy and showed off with their weapons. Much of Kuwait City is ruined, broken glass and broken buildings everywhere. And there's a great deal of smoke here. Oil fires burn all around the city, fires set by Saddam's troops before many of them surrendered and others tried to head north. More U.S. troops are expected to enter Kuwait City tomorrow, and an even bigger celebration is expected.
Mixed emotions here. People are certainly relieved to have their capital city back. For so long under the control of the Iraqis, now under the control of the Kuwaitis. People here are also enraged. Their city's been destroyed by the Iraqis, more in the last couple of days than in the previous couple of weeks. They want Saddam Hussein to pay. That is, those who say they don't want Saddam Hussein dead. People are very angry here tonight. This is Steve Handelsman reporting live from Kuwait City. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Steve. As we told you at the top of this broadcast, President Bush will address the nation in a little less than an hour, at which time he is expected to declare that Kuwait is liberated and that the war is all but over. A White House official says the president will announce that some of the 537,000 troops deployed will soon be returning home, although some fighting will continue until the Iraqi army is completely neutralized.
The man tonight getting the credit for masterminding the defeat of the Iraqi army, General Norman Schwarzkopf, gave his first military briefing today since the ground war began. And, says Schwarzkopf, one of the keys to the coalition's success turned out to be a gigantic hoax. Center 4's Tom Sinkovitz joins us with that part of the story.
Well, we do know, Evan, that General Schwarzkopf is a highly intelligent man. He has been theorizing military strategy in the Persian Gulf for years, and he was dealing with an opposing commander who was totally outthought.
The strategy was deception from the very week coalition troops arrived in Saudi Arabia last August. General Schwarzkopf's first chart showed how his troops in Saudi Arabia, in blue, lined up almost head-to-head with the Iraqi troops in red, who were in Kuwait and Iraq. Then there was the massive fake. It happened to the east in the Persian Gulf, the amphibious rehearsal called Operation Imminent Thunder.
Because we wanted the Iraqis to continue to believe that we were going to conduct a massive amphibious operation in this area. We continued to have those operations because we wanted him to concentrate his forces, which he did.
Next, the air assault began. Bombs weakened those divisions closest to the Saudi border, and just as importantly, eliminated the Iraqi Air Force, Saddam Hussein's only means of seeing coalition troop movements. Late last week, the trap was sprung.
We did a massive movement of troops all the way out to the west, to the extreme west, because at that time we knew that he was still fixed in this area with the vast majority of his forces.
That western flank with extraordinary numbers of troops, tanks, and artillery, and 60 days' worth of food and water, swept into and through Iraq, and made it clear in the process, Schwarzkopf said, that the objective was strictly military.
Ladies and gentlemen, when we were here, we were 150 miles away from Baghdad, and there was nobody between us and Baghdad. If it had been our intention to take Iraq, if it had been our intention to destroy the country, if it had been our intention to overrun the country, we could have done it unopposed.
All that's left now, 2 divisions of Republican Guard troops.
And, oh, by the way, they also were well to the rear here, okay? So they could be the first ones to bug out, okay, when the battlefield started folding, while these poor fellows up here who didn't want to be here in the first place bore the brunt of the attack. But it didn't happen.
At times, he was emotional. One of his charts showed that U.S. deaths have reached 28 in the land battle, which he called miraculous.
It'll never be miraculous to the families of those people, but it is miraculous.
For the first time, General Schwarzkopf revealed another reason why there was so little resistance from the Iraqi troops on the front lines in Kuwait.
There was a very, very large number of dead in these units, a very, very large number of dead.
And in the end, what does he think of Saddam Hussein as a military leader?
As far as Saddam Hussein being a great military strategist, he is neither a strategist, nor is he schooled in the operational arts, nor is he a tactician, nor is he a general, nor is he as a soldier. Other than that, he's a great military man. I want you to know that.
One other point General Schwarzkopf made was that Saddam Hussein has lots of soldiers left but no equipment. He is no longer an offensive threat in his region unless someone rearms him, Schwarzkopf.
Primary goal of the whole operation.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Tom.
Well, satellite technology has given Americans an immediate window on the war, which can produce both comfort and concern for the families who've come to depend on television for word from the front. For one Bay Area woman, it really hit home when that military barracks in Saudi Arabia was blown apart by a Scud missile. Anthony Moore has her story.
Sources say an Iraqi missile attack has killed a number of U.S. soldiers.
Imagine Rosa Lee Hoder's reaction when these pictures flashed across TV screens.
Then they had it flash on the 475th headquarters group above Duran was hit. I just, oh my God, that's her outfit.
Rosa Lee's daughter, Heidi, is just 19, Rosa's baby, driving trucks in Desert Storm. A San Jose waitress, Rosa Lee rushed home, but the Army couldn't tell her her daughter's fate. Surprisingly, live TV provided comfort, a way to focus worry.
To be able to see it and everything, it seemed like it gave me more hope.
It was 2 a.m. when Rosa's prayers were answered with a phone call.
Bless her heart. It was, hello, this is Saudi Arabia calling. And she said, I'm okay, I'm okay.
Heidi had been ordered on an overnight mission. She was away from the barracks. So now, more than ever, Rosa wants Heidi home.
This has been quite a scare. Quite a scare.
Anthony Moore, News Center 4.
Still to come on News Center 4 at 5 this night, we're going to take you below decks in the aircraft carrier Abe Lincoln to see what life is.
But they fled, and the evidence of their flight, clothes, weapons, litters the shoulder of the highway. Those who could not flee surrendered, and they are still surrendering. This squad of Iraqis crossed the road and gave themselves up to our CBS News team while we were stopped. We gave them a brisk, unprofessional frisking and some Army rations and water. They told us it was the first food and water they'd had in 3 days. At the edge of Kuwait City, U.S. Marines have pitched camp and raised the American flag near the airport. They'd been through some rough moments getting here, their first time in combat, and they talked about it.
Artillery, it lands right near your track or behind it or something like that. I know I had one that kind of went beside me and kind of blew me back out of the seat for a little bit.
We got some mortar rounds hit awful close, and then we had some arty come in on us. That was pretty scary.
Hey, we're all okay. Alpha Company, 18, Fort North Kentucky. Everybody's okay.
They spent most of the day waving back to grateful Kuwaitis from off the highway. The Marines are stuck here because the diplomats have decided it's better to let the Arab coalition forces come in and liberate Kuwait City. And there were thousands of Kuwaitis cheering those troops as they entered Kuwait City late today.
Allahu Akbar.
And out in the desert, some of those Arab, Saudi Arabian soldiers were at prayer, thanking their God that this jihad, this war between good and evil, has so far been short, mercifully bloodless, and the good guys have finally won. Richard Threlkeld, CBS News, on the road to Kuwait City.
Let me show you something now that's just a few yards beyond our camera, out there in the dark, along the beach. Proof positive that this is still a war zone. These are SAM missile ground-to-air rockets. What they'd intended to do is set up the SAM missile sites on top of this abandoned restaurant, right by the sea, looking out, looking for that amphibious attack, which had been feinted, as it turned out here. Now, this had been something called Shrimpy's Restaurant by the Sea. The water's right out there with a long, blonde beach. Shrimpy's Restaurant by the Sea became, in effect, a bunker for Iraqi troops with their SAM missiles. And see where they were living all back in here. They left here in a hurry. They had box after box of all kinds of weapons in here. The intention was to make what's out front of this command bunker a killing ground for Marines. Clip after clip. Fast speeding. Careful where we put that down. They were loaded for bear in here. Now, out there, just past this patio of the restaurant, beyond the palm trees in the darkness, is the beach. And everywhere along this beach, small trenches, foxholes, deep, long, interconnected trenches. And up here, an anti-aircraft gun emplacement. When we come back on the CBS Evening News live from Kuwait City, we'll be switching to Betsy Aaron in Baghdad, so stay here with us. While President Bush in his address later tonight is expected to basically declare victory, earlier today he shot down another ceasefire maneuver by Saddam Hussein and unleashed another barrage at Baghdad. Betsy Aaron is there.
This was Baghdad tonight during the heaviest bombing in a week. The bombs falling just 2 hours after Iraq made additional concessions with conditions to the Allied demands, all in search of a ceasefire. So what about the takeover of Kuwait? Was it worth it?
Something belongs to us. Something deep in our hearts and minds. What do you want me to tell you?
We're going to show all of the Arab, world that the Arabs are not always down. They can stand up, and we stood.
With their city in ruins, what is left on the street is pride.
You tell him we wouldn't surrender. You tell him.
The average citizen here is confused by the politics swirling around him. He thinks that the Iraqi government has made every concession it can make for a peace with honor. He believes Iraq is due at least that. And tonight, this is what the Allies had to say to the Iraqis. Betsy Aaron, CBS News, Baghdad.
In a moment, I'll be back with the U.S. Marine Commander, whose division led the assault that freed Kuwait City. Beaches of a now liberated Kuwait City with Marine Major General Mike Myatt of Huntsville, Texas. General, congratulations. Tell us what your young Marines did and how they did it.
They performed superbly, Dan. Our first day when we kicked off the operation, they executed our plan perfectly, one of the few times where your plan doesn't change. We got through both obstacle belts. We had the special equipment that had been sent in by the Commandant. We trained with it, and it went real well. Explosive breaches. The only thing we were concerned about was the artillery catching us between the two obstacle belts. And our Marine Air shut that artillery down when they started firing on us. And then we moved about 40 kilometers that first day. The next day, early in the morning, we got indications they were going to counterattack, and the 5th Mech Division counterattacked early in the morning. We did a little artillery time on target with the whole regiment to spoil their attack, and it flushed them out of the oil fields. We were moving to the east of the oil fields, and we knew we had the Saudis on our right flank, and we knew they were pushing up there, and it was fleshing people into us. So with our aviation assets and our people that fought this thing smart, we didn't fight anybody head on. We kept maneuvering on their flank. The second day, we didn't make much progress because of the counterattack. Third day, we kicked off early in the morning, and we were up here at Kuwait City. By about 1800, we were outside Kuwait City, ready to take the international airport.
We have only a few seconds left. How good of fighters were the Iraqis?
Well, it depended. Some of them, I think the armor and artillery units were pretty good. The infantry units collapsed quickly, and that's where most of the prisoners are coming from.
General, thank you very much. Again, congratulations on a job wonderfully done.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
In a moment, we'll have more on the war, so stay here with us. Who lives and who dies in war follows no logic. Of the 28 U.S. Army reservists killed in Monday's Scud attack, 10 belonged to one unit based in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, and 2 were women. Frank Courier reports on a town in flag-draped mourning.
March!
Within the proud ranks of this little Army Reserve unit near Pittsburgh, casualties mount. And today the military confirms 23-year-old Beverly Clark and 22-year-old Christine Mays, both Army specialists, are the first women killed in the Persian Gulf War.
She died believing in what she believed in, and she was proud to be there and be part of it.
Here in the hills of western Pennsylvania, it's the sad news everyone dreaded. After a tearful send-off, reservists from the 14th Quartermaster Detachment went to war, and after only a week in Saudi Arabia, a Scud missile destroyed their barracks, killing 28, injuring 100 more.
I would say a commander's worst fear has just been realized.
The news of heavy casualties from the Scud attack is a shock to many here in Greensburg who assumed their hometown heroes, mostly weekend warriors, held safe jobs deep behind the front lines. Today, with the headquarters in mourning, families sought help wherever they could find it. Parents of everyday school teachers, students, and truck drivers turned reservists who won't be coming home.
It hurts so bad to believe it. He promised me he'd be back.
At a high school memorial service, students honored the victims as peacemakers. Here in this town, with the first women to die in a unit with the military's biggest losses, the Gulf War has touched home. Frank Courier, CBS News, Greensburg, Pennsylvania.
CBS News can now report that President Bush, in his address to the nation tonight at 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock Central Time, is going to declare an end to the military campaign. Not a ceasefire. American forces will continue to shoot back if they are fired upon, but the president is now prepared to declare an end to the military campaign. In a word, they're mopping it up. Don't forget there'll be America Tonight after your late-night local news, and we'll be on the air with the president's address. Dan Rather for the CBS Evening News, live from Kuwait City. See you again shortly.
City News.
Peter Jennings.
Good evening. The President is going to speak to the nation now. We've known for a couple of hours that the President wanted to come out and talk to the nation about the state of the war in the Persian Gulf. We're also pretty much assured that his news is going to be good. That is to say that the war is very close to a formal end. General Schwarzkopf, the Allied commander, spoke at an extensive briefing in Saudi Arabia earlier today, and he said the mission has been accomplished. So perhaps that's a hint of what the President is going to say. Let's go quickly to the Pentagon and briefly to the Pentagon. ABC's Bob Zelnick. What's the status on the battlefield?
Peter, the bombing stopped hours ago. The fighting is winding down. They're just sporadic little episodes. In the last major battle of the war along Highway 8 in southern Iraq, 200 Iraqi tanks were destroyed. That's more than 90% of the tanks they brought to the Kuwait theater are now gone.
Okay, Sam Donaldson is standing by in Kuwait City. Sam, a couple seconds from you before the President comes.
Well, Peter, the city's asleep at the moment, but asleep from joy of the exhilaration of welcoming people in. It's free now. It's not asleep because of the fear of the Iraqi occupation, which has ended.
Okay, Sam, we'll come back to you after the President's speech. Thanks very much. At the White House, our White House correspondent, Rick Britt. What's he going to say, do you think?
Well, I think he's going to say that the war is basically over, and he's going to begin to sketch out some of the steps that he'd like to take with the coalition to try to begin to organize the peace.
Okay, Britt Hume and my other colleagues will talk to them all when the President has finished. General Schwarzkopf said it today, the mission is accomplished. One historian said today, never has so much damage been done by one army to another, with one army, the U.S. Army, suffering so few casualties. Here's the President speaking to the nation from the Oval Office.
Kuwait is liberated. Iraq's army is defeated. Our military objectives are met. Kuwait is once more in the hands of Kuwaitis in control of their own destiny. We share in their joy, a joy tempered only by our compassion for their ordeal. Tonight, the Kuwaiti flag once again flies above the capital of a free and sovereign nation, and the American flag flies above our embassy. 7 months ago, America and the world drew a line in the sand. We declared that the aggression against Kuwait would not stand. And tonight, America and the world have kept their word. This is not a time of euphoria, certainly not a time to gloat, but it is a time of pride. pride in our troops, pride in the friends who stood with us in the crisis, pride in our nation, and the people whose strength and resolve made victory quick, decisive, and just. And soon, we will open wide our arms to welcome back home to America our magnificent fighting forces. No one country can claim this victory as its own. It was not only a victory for Kuwait, but a victory for all the coalition partners. This is a victory for the United Nations, for all mankind, for the rule of law, and for what is right. After consulting with Secretary of Defense Cheney, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Powell, and our coalition partners, I am pleased to announce that at midnight tonight, Eastern Standard Time, exactly 100 hours since ground operations commenced and 6 weeks since the start of Operation Desert Storm, all United States and coalition forces will suspend offensive combat operations. It is up to Iraq whether this suspension on the part of the coalition becomes a permanent ceasefire. Coalition political and military terms for a formal ceasefire include the following requirements. Iraq must release immediately all coalition prisoners of war, third country nationals, and the remains of all who have fallen. Iraq must release all Kuwaiti detainees. Iraq also must inform Kuwaiti authorities of the location and nature of all land and sea mines. Iraq must comply fully with all relevant United Nations Security Council resolutions. This includes a rescinding of Iraq's August decision to annex Kuwait and acceptance in principle of Iraq's responsibility to pay compensation for the loss, damage, and injury its aggression has caused. The coalition calls upon the Iraqi government to designate military commanders to meet within 48 hours with their coalition counterparts at a place in the theater of operations to be specified to arrange for military aspects of the ceasefire. Further, I have asked Secretary of State Baker to request that the United Nations Security Council meet to formulate the necessary arrangements for this war to be ended. This suspension of offensive combat operations is contingent upon Iraq's not firing upon any coalition forces and not launching Scud missiles against any other country. If Iraq violates these terms, coalition forces will be free to resume military operations. At every opportunity, I have said to the people of Iraq that our quarrel was not with them, but instead with their leadership, and above all with Saddam Hussein. This remains the case. You, the people of Iraq, are not our enemy. We do not seek your destruction. We have treated your POWs with kindness. Coalition forces fought this war only as a last resort and look forward to the day when Iraq is led by people prepared to live in peace with their neighbors. We must now begin to look beyond victory in war. We must meet the challenge of securing the peace. In the future, as before, we will consult with our coalition partners. We've already done a good deal of thinking and planning for the post-war period, and Secretary Baker has already begun to consult with our coalition partners on the region's challenges. There can be and will be no solely American answer to all these challenges, but we can assist and support the countries of the region and be a catalyst for peace. In this spirit, as Secretary Baker will go to the region next week to begin a new round of consultations. This war is now behind us. Ahead of us is the difficult task of securing a potentially historic peace. Tonight, though, Let us be proud of what we have accomplished. Let us give thanks to those who risked their lives. Let us never forget those who gave their lives. May God bless our valiant military forces and their families, and let us all remember them in our prayers. Good night, and may God bless the United States of America.
42 days and 3 hours since the air campaign began. The war is now behind us, says the President. And just to get the absolute precise details of the battlefield on the table once again, he says that all U.S. and coalition forces will suspend offensive combat operations provided Iraq does not fire on coalition forces or does not launch any Scuds. He may particularly have in mind there the kind of deadly business the Iraqis have continued to do against the Israelis even after the ground war began, and that devastating attack on Saudi Arabia the other day when 28 Americans died in one attack, more than died in all of the ground war itself. Just to remind you what General Schwarzkopf said at his briefing earlier today in terms of the overall casualties for Americans in the campaign, 79 dead, 213 wounded, and 44 missing, and 9 prisoners of war. And the President calls again for the Iraqis to release immediately all Allied coalition prisoners of war. The Iraqis have never let the International Committee of the Red Cross even come to see them. These conditions about asking where the mines are, insisting that Iraqi liaison officers meet, are all pretty much consistent with the President's demands last Sunday, in which he at one point said the Iraqis had just that one day to get out. So much has transpired since then. Let's just move around a little bit and get some reaction. Let's go first back to Kuwait City, because Sam Donaldson, I don't know if anybody there's had a chance to hear the President now, because the Kuwaitis' contact with the outside world has been limited. But I would think the reaction there tomorrow morning will be fairly obvious.
Well, obviously, Peter, they're going to be delighted that they are, first of all, free, and second, that the United States kept its word. I think there was a little skepticism here at the beginning of the campaign last August, right after Iraq invaded Kuwait, that the rest of the world would come to their aid. And I think for a while they thought maybe the United States would talk tough but not produce. Well, of course, the United States and its coalition partners have produced, and I think that will, in the minds of the Kuwaitis, not only please them, but mean a better relationship in the future with Washington.
Okay, Sam, thanks very much. The President does say there that the Secretary of State, Mr. Baker, is going to go to the Middle East. That is not a particular surprise to us. ABC's John McCarthy is standing by at the State Department. In fact, the Secretary is about to go off on a pretty exhaustive journey, isn't he, John?
I think it's his intention to visit every country that has been a participant in this situation out in the Persian Gulf, barring Iran and barring Iraq. Other than that, he's going to be making a lot of stops. He's probably going to make his very first stop to Israel as Secretary of State. That's been a point of contention between the United States and Israel. And at each stop, Peter, what he is going to do is begin to think about how the region can begin the healing process, how many troops need to stay, what the composition of those forces are going to be, how the economic rebuilding can begin, and what sorts of sanctions are going to have to stay to prevent Iraq from rebuilding its military.
Okay, John, just before we look at the future a little more extensively, let's look a little bit at the past and go back to the Pentagon, where ABC's Bob Zelnick is still standing by. Bob, General Schwarzkopf told us today the dimensions of the U.S., or I beg your pardon, the Allied coalition victory over the Iraqis. Can you summarize it in terms of equipment destroyed and personnel destroyed, even though you don't have the precise statistics at your fingertips?
Well, Peter, the Iraqis, by my count, lost over 3,900 tanks. And since they brought only just a few over 4,000 into the battlefield, we can see what utter devastation was wreaked upon them. The numbers were similar with troop carriers, with artillery pieces, and while we have nothing resembling an approximate count of personnel, just the notion of having these vast Iraqi frontline divisions wiped out by bombing or attrition or desertion and offering so little resistance paints a pretty good picture of this. And when you compare it to less than 100 U.S. forces killed, it's just a remarkable, remarkable victory.
Okay, thanks, Bob, very much. Very good summary in that. The General Schwarzkopf today went on at great length on just how much damage had been done. But overall, he summarized it up by saying that Iraq was not going to be a capable offensive combat force. He pointed out that those Iraqi divisions which were still north of the rivers, cut off from Kuwait, now were infantry divisions. All the armor below, as Bob Zelnick, has been destroyed. As far as General Schwarzkopf was concerned, the Iraqis were no longer going to be a threat to their neighbors. In terms of Iraqis who have died in the combat, the general has said, as he said from the beginning, that there were never going to be any public assessments of how many Iraqis were killed, primarily by the U.S. and the other Allied bombing campaign from the air, but he said the numbers were very, very large. We'll be back.
War will continue in a moment.
As a good measure of what has happened in the course of this war, the Iraqis are believed to have lost 3,700 tanks. Coalition forces have lost no tanks. Suzanne?
Thanks, Pete. And Coalition Commander General Norman Schwarzkopf took center stage today, describing how his forces sent the Iraqis running. In today's extraordinary briefing from Riyadh, the general outlined a battle strategy he says will go down in history.
The ground war has been declared a success. The Gulf War nearly over. So today the commander of U.S. forces broke his silence. General Norman Schwarzkopf explained the strategy.
Therefore, when we took out his Air Force, for all intents and purposes, we took out his ability to see what we were doing down here in Saudi Arabia.
The Allied Air Force then knocked out Iraqi communications, and coalition ground forces were able to move en masse to the west. 2 reconnaissance units positioned themselves deep into enemy territory.
When we knew that he couldn't see us anymore, we did a massive movement of troops all the way out to the west, to the extreme west, because at that time we knew that he was still fixed in this area with the vast majority of his forces.
When the ground war began, American forces moved into southern Kuwait. Saudi troops moved up the coast, and naval units stayed off the coast acting as a decoy. Saddam Hussein expected an attack from the east, the coast, but the real threat entered Iraq from the west.
Because of our deception plan and the way it worked, we didn't even have to worry about a barrier. We just went right around the enemy and were behind him in no time at all.
By the afternoon of the first day, British, Egyptian, and Saudi forces invaded Iraq. But the general made clear his mission was not to capture Iraq.
Ladies and gentlemen, when we were here, we were 150 miles away from Baghdad, and there was nobody between us and Baghdad. If it had been our intention to take Iraq, if it had been our intention to destroy the country, if it had been our intention to overrun the country, we could have done it unopposed for all intents and purposes from this position at that time.
During the last 2 days, coalition forces tightened the noose. Kuwait City was secured today, and Iraq's elite Republican Guard was trapped along the border south of Basra. The general said his job is to put the Republican Guard out of business.
We're not in the business of killing them, but they're continuing to fight, and as long as they continue to fight, we're going to continue to fight with them.
And when asked about Saddam Hussein as a commander...
As far as Saddam Hussein being a great military strategist, he is neither a strategist, nor is he schooled in the operational art, nor is he a tactician, nor is he a general, nor is he as a soldier. Other than that, he's a great military man. I want you to know that.
Well, and speaking of Saddam Hussein, there has been absolutely no word today about where he is or how he is reacting to the latest developments.
Since the start of the Gulf crisis, we've turned for insight and analysis to Dr. Pat Hatcher, the Center for Specialist on National Security Policy. He is with us again tonight. It has been a story of surprises almost from the very first back in August, Pat. But any surprises in the President's speech or in where we stand tonight?
I think what the President's doing tonight is he's turning back to the peace offensive. He knows that the problems of peace are going to be as difficult as the problems of this war. While he has General Schwarzkopf, who's everybody's ideal general for this war, he has to find somebody now who's going to be ideal for the peace, and that's going to be very, very difficult. He's certainly beginning to reach out one more time to the Iraqi people, telling them we are not their enemy, and hoping that someone, somewhere, Basra to Baghdad, will take action to bring a new government into power.
He set down another deadline at 12 o'clock midnight Eastern time, less than 3 hours from now. What if Saddam Hussein doesn't turn over the Kuwaitis and the POWs?
Well, the first thing he wants to make sure of is there's no more firing. So he said no more Scud attacks and no more attacks on American, French, Allied, other forces in the field. Then he wants a permanent ceasefire, and to get that, you have to have the release of the prisoners, you have to have the release of the hostages, the Kuwaitis, you have to start filling the UN agenda. Now, he might get the first part and not get the second. The first part's going to be very difficult. There's some 9 scattered battalions that still can fight. You got to get to them, and the only way to get to them tonight is by radio in the clear. You just get up on a good military radio and you start communicating. If a man doesn't want to communicate and stops anyone else from communicating, those battalions won't have the word to stop firing.
Pat, the president took pains to say we have been planning for the peace and what we're going to do. Do you personally have some notations on this? Did he say enough about that? Is he going to need to say much, much more?
He's going to say much, much more, because the American people want to know if this means that large numbers of Americans are going to remain in the arena, and you're going to have a major debate about that, both in the Congress and the public at large, about whether or not we should be there as some sort of police force that goes through a number of years. I think in many ways that's going to be very, very divisive, because a large number of Americans are going to say, we need to help, but then we need to get out.
All right, Pat Hatcher, we thank you once again. Coming up next, other key stories.
Put together the details.
Officials say the Iraqis lost hundreds of tanks in the battle. Officials say as Allied forces approached from the west, elements of the Guard divisions came forward to meet them. But the Iraqis came under heavy fire, mainly from Apache helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft like the A-10. As they tried to turn and flee, Allied tanks used superior speed to outflank them, and their long-range guns to destroy many of the Iraqi tanks from so far away that the Iraqis could not fire back. The remaining tanks and troop carriers tried to fight their way eastward toward Basra, but officials say many of those were destroyed by pursuing aircraft. Officials say the Iraqi units appear to have been surprised by the Allied attack and once again seemed unable to coordinate their attack because of bad communications. This may explain why the Guards never moved south to defend Kuwait. With their heavy divisions now defeated, only 5 light infantry divisions remain of the Republican Guards, not enough to threaten their neighbors. That's why officials here tonight see little risk in President Bush's order to suspend offensive operations. Peter?
Bob, that's a big building in which you work, but I'd like to know if you can assess the mood in this institution where they are paid to make war.
Well, the mood is one of infinite satisfaction with the results not only of this particular war, but with the generation of military thinking that went into it, the generation that purchased smart weapons, the generation that purchased sophisticated aircraft, the generation that saw through the birth and development of the all-volunteer forces.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Like I said, paid to make war, could also said paid to keep the peace. In a moment, forcing the last Iraqi soldiers out of Kuwait, General Schwarzkopf will explain how the war was fought and won, and the people of Kuwait, they've been celebrating their liberation.
Holding Kuwait City, the international airport. By daybreak, it was over. Marines collected the spoils of war, weapons, ammunition, and an Iraqi helicopter. While the formal, more ceremonial liberation of the city was left up to the Kuwaiti and Saudi armies, the Marines quickly secured the western and southern sections of the city. A combination of smoke from more than 500 oil well fires and bad weather actually helped the Marines.
Visibility sometimes was less than 50 meters, and we surprised them. I think the speed with which we moved surprised them.
American and British armored divisions also used the element of surprise to attack the Republican Guards in western Kuwait. The tank battle ended in the destruction of the southernmost Republican Guard division and the defeat of a division of Iraq's armored reserve. But there were Allied losses as well. This afternoon, an American A-10 tank killer accidentally attacked 2 British armored personnel carriers, killing 9 British soldiers. 4 others were killed by Iraqi fire. The company commander called his men together to talk about the loss.
We took a knock yesterday. You're all grown men. You're all soldiers. And we go on. I'm very proud of you last night. It didn't seem to affect what we did in the slightest. So thank you very much indeed. We go on, boys.
Throughout the land campaign, American generals say they have benefited from low morale among Iraqi soldiers.
My view is that their heart just wasn't in it. POWs have said this. Deserters told us this early on. We don't know why we're here. We don't know why we invaded Kuwait.
Tell them not to worry. They're going to be all right.
The military says it can no longer say with accuracy how many prisoners of war have been collected. Today, the estimate was more than 50,000. Poorly fed and poorly equipped, American officers said Iraqi soldiers had another problem.
And the incoming was from their own artillery trying to stop them from deserting or surrendering.
They're trying to shoot their own people.
They were trying to shoot their own people.
Now that the Iraqi army has collapsed, American soldiers are already working on the next phase, clearing out pockets of resistance and searching buildings for booby traps and other explosives. With the war now ending, American troops are now asking, how soon will they go home? Bill Redeker, ABC News, Saudi Arabia.
Military historians have been talking about the battle today, trying to put it in overall perspective. They tell us there has never been a war in which one army has suffered so few losses while inflicting such heavy damage on the other. The cost in lives to the U.S., 79 Americans have died since the war began. 44 are missing in the ground war alone. 28 Americans have now been killed, plus 23 pilots and 28 reservists, including 3 women who died when that Scud missile hit their barracks in Saudi Arabia on Monday. At his briefing today, General Schwarzkopf would not estimate how many Iraqis have died, but he said the number was, and these are his words, large, very, very large. 29 Iraqi divisions have been destroyed or made ineffective. We'll be back. But when the time was right, he would tell us all how he planned it. Today was the day.
Basically, the problem we were faced with was this. When you looked at the troop numbers, they really outnumbered us about 3 to 2. And when you consider the number of combat service support people we have, that's logisticians and that sort of thing in our armed forces, as far as fighting troops, we were really outnumbered 2 to 1. In addition to that, they had about 4,700 tanks versus our 3,500 when the buildup was complete, and they had a great deal more artillery than we do. What we did, of course, was start an extensive air campaign, and I briefed you in quite some detail on that in the past. One of the purposes I told you at that time of that extensive air campaign was to isolate the Kuwaiti theater of operation by taking out all the bridges and supply lines that ran between the north and the southern part of Iraq. That was to prevent reinforcement and supply coming into the southern part of Iraq and the Kuwaiti theater of operation. We also at that time had a very active naval presence out in the Gulf, and we made sure that everybody understood about that naval presence. One of the reasons why we did that is because it became very apparent to us early on that the Iraqis were quite concerned about an amphibious operation across the shores to liberate Kuwait, this being Kuwait City. They put a very, very heavy barrier of infantry along here, and they proceeded to build an extensive barrier that went all the way across the border, down and around and up the side of Kuwait. We continued our heavy operations out in the sea because we wanted the Iraqis to continue to believe that we were going to conduct a massive amphibious operation in this area. I think this is probably one of the most important parts of the entire briefing I could talk about. As you know, very early on, we took out the Iraqi Air Force. We knew that he had very, very limited reconnaissance means, and therefore when we took out his Air Force, for all intents and purposes, we took out his ability to see what we were doing down here in Saudi Arabia. Once we had taken out his eyes, we did what could best be described as the Hail Mary play in football. When we knew that he couldn't see us anymore, we did a massive movement of troops all the way out to the west, to the extreme west, because at that time we knew that he was still fixed in this area with the vast majority of his forces, and once the air campaign started, he would be incapable of moving out to counter this move, even if he knew we made it. I must tell you, I can't recall any time in the annals of military history when this number of forces have moved over this distance to put themselves in a position to be able to attack. Not only did we move the troops out there, but we literally moved thousands and thousands of tons of fuel, of ammunition, of spare parts, of water, and of food out here into this area because we wanted to have enough supplies on hand so that if we launched this and we got into a slugfest battle which we very easily could have gotten into. We'd have enough supplies to last for 60 days. Our plan initially had been to start over here in this area and do exactly what the Iraqis thought we were going to do, and that's take them on head-on into their most heavily defended area. At 4 o'clock in the morning, the Marines, the 1st Marine Division and the 2nd Marine Division, launched attacks through the barrier system. They were accompanied by the the Tiger Brigade, U.S. Army Tiger Brigade of the 2nd Armored Division. At the same time, over here, 2 Saudi task forces also launched a penetration through this barrier. But while they were doing that, at 4 o'clock in the morning over here, the 6th French Armored Division, accompanied by a brigade of the 82nd Airborne, also launched an overland attack to their objective up in this area, Al Salman Airfield. And we were held up a little bit by the weather, but by 8 o'clock in the morning, the 101st Airborne Air Assault launched an air assault deep in the enemy's territory to establish a forward operating base in this location right here. I can't say enough about the 2 Marine divisions. If I use words like brilliant, it would really be an under-description of the absolutely superb job that they did in breaching the so-called impenetrable barrier. It was a classic, absolutely classic military breaching of a very, very tough minefield, barbed wire, fire trenches type barrier. They went through the first barrier like it was water. They went across into the second barrier line. Even though they were under artillery fire at the time, they continued to open up that breach, and then they brought both divisions streaming through that breach. We launched another Egyptian Arab force in this location and another Saudi force in this location, again to penetrate the barrier, but once again to make the enemy continue to think that we're doing exactly what he wanted us to do, and that's make a headlong assault into a very, very tough barrier system, a very, very tough mission for these folks here. Once the 101st had their forward operating base established here, they then went ahead and launched into the Tigris and Euphrates Valley. The next 2 days went exactly like we thought they would go. The Saudi forces that came in and took and Arab forces that came in and took these 2 initial objectives turned to come in on the flank heading towards Kuwait City, located right in this area here. The British UK passed through and continued to attack up this flank, and of course the 7th Corps came in and attacked in this direction, as shown here. The 24th Infantry Division made an unbelievable move all the way across into the Tigris and Euphrates Valley and proceeded in blocking this avenue of egress out, which was the only avenue of egress left because we continued to make sure that the bridges stayed down. So there was no way out once the 24th was in this area, and the 101st continued to operate in here. The French, having succeeded in achieving all of their objectives, then set up a flanking position, a flank guard position here to make sure that no forces come in and get us from the flank. By this time, we had destroyed or rendered completely ineffective over 21 Iraqi divisions. Next, please. And of course, that then brings us to today. Where we are today is we now have a solid wall across the north of the 18th Airborne Corps, consisting of the units shown right here, attacking straight to the east. We have a solid wall here again of the 7th Corps, also attacking straight to the east.
I wonder if in an overview, despite these enormously illustrative pictures, you could say what's left of the Iraqi army in terms of how long could it be before he could ever be a regional threat or a threat to the region again?
Well, there's not enough left at all for him to be a regional threat to the region, an offensive regional threat. As you know, he's got a very large army, but most of the army that is left north of the Tigris-Euphrates Valley is an infantry army. It's not an armored army. It's not an armor-heavy army, which means it really isn't an offensive army. So it doesn't have enough left unless someone chooses to rearm them in the future.
The general used these figures to show just how badly the Iraqi army had been chewed up. More than 3,000 Iraqi tanks destroyed, 88% of his tanks in the Kuwaiti theater, 65% of Iraq's armored vehicles, and 69% of the artillery. We will have more on the Schwarzkopf briefing later in this special edition of World News Tonight, and ABC will broadcast the entire briefing later this evening, right after Nightline, with Ted Koppel reporting from the Gulf. And we'll have more news in just a moment.
One company knows the global market so well that it brings you investment opportunities from America and around the world. With a family of mutual funds that give you an intelligent, professional approach to investing, combined with the benefits of diversification.